Hallo und herzlich willkommen zur heutigen Sitzung der Ringvorlesung Informationswissenschaft und Digital Humanities. Ich hoffe, Sie verzeihen mir das, weil der Speaker Englisch ist, werde ich direkt auf Englisch umsteigen. Hello and welcome to this session of the lecture series Information Science and Digital Humanities. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Dr. Kevin Tang, who's joining us today and who will give a talk on a current project of his. Professor Dr. Tang is professor in English linguistics with a specialization in phonetics, phonology, morphology at the Department of English Language and Linguistics here in Düsseldorf. He holds both a master's degree in engineering from Cambridge and a master's degree in linguistics from the University College of London. At UCL, he also received his PhD and he worked as a postdoc at Yale. Now he holds a courtesy appointment at the University of Florida, and he's the director of the Speech, Lexicon, and Modeling Lab here in Düsseldorf. His research also spans a wide range of topics, from computational linguistics to interdisciplinary research in medical and biomedical, as well as sociolinguistics projects. So not only his degrees are very span a wide range of topics, but also his research interest. And in his talk, he will introduce his Reanimating African-American Oral Histories of the Gulf South project. And we're delighted to have you, Kevin, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stefan. And let me do the screen share. Okay. Can you guys see the screen?
Works perfectly.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for the gracious introduction, and thank you again for inviting me to share my current project with you all. And I'm excited to hear what the community here in Düsseldorf and indeed in the wider digital humanities researchers would think about this project, and I would love any feedback that you have for me. This project is a large collaborative project with collaborators at the University of Florida, with the University of Florida Library, Linguistics Department, as well as the Samuel Proctor Oral History Project program, and also with the Social Justice Collective. And this project is currently funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities in the USA. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce this project and what we have been doing so far in the last almost 1 year. Just to acknowledge our funding agency, this project is funded by National Endowment for the Humanities, and we have just started this project for just under a year now, and we have 3 more years, 2 or 3 more years to go. And this project has a company website, and I'll encourage you to check it out, and we'll basically use it to update any current and future research directions that we have and any kind of public events that we hold. So I'm going to share a little bit about the linguistic aspect of this project. This project has multiple components there's education components, there's the oral history component, there's a library component, and I'm going to represent mostly the linguistic component here today. And with the computational linguistic side, here these are our core research team members, I myself, and of course also Professor Sarah Mueller, who is with the Department of Linguistics at the University of Florida, and also 2 graduate students, Bill Dyer and Alexis Davids, also at the University of Florida. And we're also working with a large number of undergraduate trainees, such as Michael Bartini and Christina Jean-Philippe. And so to start off with, I'd like to talk a little bit about the motivation behind this research. So essentially, we have multiple groups of stakeholders that prompted us to think about developing this project in the first place. So first of all, the linguists and also language technologists are our kind of one group of stakeholders. So for example, current resources in African American language, and I'll talk more about what this means in a second. With this specific language variety, the biggest data set out there right now is the Corral data set, with about 160 sociolinguistic interviews. However, there is a lot of annotations that are not quite rich enough. And also, we wanted really to develop a new data set, an expanded data set that spans across the different communities in Florida and the Gulf South, and also to improve any kind of tools that we can develop for the African American language user community. And we want to be able to do better sociolinguistic research for this specific demographics. For that, we'll need very rich demographic data that is amenable to scientific research. And to do that, we need to also make our data set searchable and also text and speech aligned. And second of all, for the language technologists, we want to be able to train more equitable language technology. And right now, there's plenty of work out there showing that language technology that we have today is hugely biased towards specific demographics and social groups. And to do that well, we need to have a large data set that is faithfully transcribed and enriched with linguistic features that are specific to this language. And second of all, the educators and community members are our kind of second or perhaps primary stakeholders. To begin with, I'd like to share a little bit about why educators care about oral histories. So to begin with, in Florida, there is a 1993 statute that requires the teaching of African American histories. However, there is not that many districts actually comply to it, and even if they don't comply, there's no real consequences. The requirements are rather vague and with very little financial support. In general, we find that there is the least amount of knowledge of African American language amongst the teachers. So teachers themselves, if they wanted to demonstrate that this language exists and the unique aspects and features of this language to the students, they couldn't really demonstrate that that easily. And furthermore, there are very few textbooks that really highlight the local history of Florida, specifically for the African American communities. And that means there are very few primary resources being utilized. And when we spoke with the teachers, we spoke with the local communities, and they have already told us that based on pilot work, that oral histories are actually really great resources for them to develop their curriculum. And it will also help them bring local history to life, animate local histories, and that would allow them to meet history and civic standards. The existing infrastructure that with the oral history interface that we have, and I'll show you that in a second, is actually quite challenging to search for specific topics that the teachers might want to explore in their classes. And the files that they have right now are not that easily accessible by theme or topic. And overall, they all agree that this interface, this portal, can really benefit from educational support for those teachers that are interested in utilizing primary resources, and therefore it is necessary to make it not just teacher-friendly, but also student user-friendly. So we really see that our history as kind of a type of hidden treasure. And hopefully I've convinced you that the teachers agree with this and linguists also agree with this, because at University of Florida, the Joe Buchanan Archive of African American Oral History contains over 700 oral history interviews, and it's growing as we speak. It contains his interviews with African Americans throughout Florida and the wider Gulf South, and it contains very rich of African American narratives and contain very complex reflections on specific topics, events, and themes. For example, civil rights activism, veterans of World War I, II, Korean, Vietnam, and the Gulf Wars, and the narrative of forced slavery, migration into Florida, and so on. And with such large resources, so here we just talked about 700 oral history interviews. As you remember, for the linguists, the existing resource they have is only 160 interviews or dialogues. And here we have over 700, which is many folds larger, and it contains very, very rich content as well, so which is going to be very beneficial for the educators to be able to use these themes and topics in their classes. So for our project here, we want to focus on a subset of the interviews. So we've said that we'll focus on 500. And these 500 are ones that are already born digital, meaning that they have high audio fidelity, and so we don't have to digitize them from tapes and so on. They are transcribed with a reasonably good transcription accuracy, well, consistency, and I'll tell you more about the transcription challenges that we face. And it contains also the most complete set of metadata, but again, there's some challenges concerning that as well. And finally, these sets of interviews are the ones with the highest level of impact because they are already being used by the community leaders, by authors, by students, by researchers, and many others. And so our key implementation goals is actually to satisfy the needs of our stakeholders. That would be the researchers, educators, and the community leaders. And to do that, we really need to enrich the data set with sociolinguistic features that are unique to African American English. And also we want to be able to generate data-driven thematic and emotional annotations. And we want to enhance the usability of this enriched collection with time-aligned interactive user interface with customizable features, so users, be it students, researchers, or teachers, can therefore search by specific linguistic features that they want to demonstrate, specific themes and emotional content that they want to extract from the collection and use them in research or classes. So just to show you the current interface that the teachers or users would be using, this is the UF digital collection interface, and you can basically search by any kind of text terms, and you can search by topic, creator, and the subject keywords. So there are some metadata fields that you can search with already. There's some basic exact searches, and you can also do regular expressions. And here's an example of a search term, civil rights, and here you basically get 114 matches, and you have to use them, you have to go into it and open up the PDF files, and in cases where there's audio and not just transcriptions, you also get a single audio file, which could be as long as 2 hours. And with the transcription, you can get 14, 15 pages of transcription. So essentially, if you want to use this resource after you identify the specific interviews that you're interested in, you will have to basically open up 2 files, a 2-hour-long audio file and a 15+ pages PDF file, and try to read one and listen to one at the same time, which is surprisingly challenging if you want to do this over 700 different interviews. If you only have 10 interviews to look from, that's fine, right? You can open up these files one by one. But when you have 700 or more, it becomes increasingly not feasible. So as the collection grows, we really need better interface and a better way of accessing the data. And so we initially developed a prototype interface like this based on another open source project called LinkView. And here we have one of such oral histories by interview with Albert White. And there are 2 speakers. There is the speaker Martha Weston and Albert White. And on the right here, we have each of the transcribed utterances. And crucially, this example here shows that the utterances are time aligned. So as the user were to play this audio file, the utterances would be, the specific utterances would show up accordingly and automatically scroll down. And users can also search for specific line and have a line-by-line playback. So let's say they're interested in only certain sentences that contain the word civic rights. They would see all the sentences containing that key term and play only those sentences. And let's say the user is interested in only one of the 2 speakers, let's say the interviewee, not the interviewer, we can also specify them, and by hiding the certain tiers of a given user. This is a very, very initial interface, so we want something that is interactive, searchable. And having developed the initial prototype, then we thought, okay, we really need to think about what the larger project needs to be like in order to deliver an interactive interface that is a lot richer than the one I've just showed you, that I've just shown you. Here, we basically find out that we need to first pre-process our oral history data by unifying the speech files and transcription files into some kind of a normalized transcription and speech collection. And there's a lot of work has to be done here. We have to normalize spelling, punctuation, make sure that the audio formats are the same. And then there's a bulk of the work that needs to be done in terms of the annotation, which is also what I'll be talking mostly about today. We'll be annotating the speech and text, make sure they're time aligned. We'll be annotating the part of speech and different entities of the transcriptions. We'll be annotating the themes and sentiments of the interviews themselves. And perhaps most difficult component of this project is to annotate the African American English features. And having annotated these features, then it will help us generate and further design our interface and to be able to get feedback from our user groups. And we have an advisory group, consists of community members, and we also have a large group of stakeholders that will help us refine our interface design and feature design as well. But today's focus is going to be on the annotation component. And so there are a few different challenges. First of all, there's a usability challenge. As you have seen, right now, the current data format is very hard to work with. The very basic search engine that we have is quite difficult to use by educators based on their feedback. And that really prompted us to make use of a linguistic and the digital humanities kind of approach. And there's also a second type of challenge being the specialized language and content. The language being used here is the language used by African Americans, not necessarily by other community groups. And that itself poses a lot of challenge when it comes to conducting digital humanity research. Second of all, the oral history content is very specialized. In order to really automatically extract meanings and themes and topics, there are local knowledge and related terms that are not necessarily known by existing data sets and models. So there are specific historical events, persons, entity, and terminologies that really required a human expert in the loop of the design. And there are also gaps and errors in the existing data. So there are actually transcription errors, and also there are gaps in the metadata. So the existing metadata really just have things like who is the author, who are the speakers. But for fine-grained linguistic research, we want to know a range of other factors like the age of the speaker, what kind of profession are they in, what are their sociolinguistic background, their gender, and the education level, the profession, and so on. And all those are basically missing because those are not the primary focus of oral history data collection, typically speaking. So I wanted to basically dive right into this specialized language challenge, namely, what is African American language or English? So African American language here is basically being used to refer to all varieties of language use in African American communities. And you might have heard of terms like AAVL and others, and some people prefer different terms for this specific type of language. And it's very important that we acknowledge that the African American community speak multiple variety of languages. So many of them would speak standardized or standard American English, so-called SAE. They also speak different regional variety of US English. If they're in Florida versus in New York versus in California, they speak their local variety as well. And on top of that, many of them also speak African American English and perhaps other language or creoles. I'm not saying that a single person will necessarily speak all these varieties, but it's very common for single speakers to speak, for example, standardized American English as well as African American English. And I also wanted to emphasize that African American English is a systematic, rule-governed linguistic variety, and it's not really an inferior or flawed or slang version of the standard American English, because there's decades and decades of research are being done by linguists, and primarily by Black linguists and scholars. And on the right, we have a number of core publications and reference books and research that has been done on this topic. And there are plenty of differences, for example, pronunciation differences and also grammatical differences, or features that simply do not appear in standard American English, but they do exist in African American English. And to give you some examples, I'm going to switch over to our coordinator to help me play some audio files. Stefan, if you will.
I will. Go to the right window. Okay.
Okay.
You tell me when I have to do what.
Okay. So here I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the features of this language. For example, here is a feature called the absence of third person S. So the essential idea here is that verbs are conjugated in the third person do not actually reflect the S morpheme that are found in American English. So here we have a sentence on the example on the right. A person do something, they're almost able to catch them. Stefan, if you might, if you would.
Person do something here, they almost able to catch them.
Could you play this again?
Person do something here, they almost able to catch them.
Thank you. So yes, you heard is a person do something as opposed to a person does something. And there are other examples like she played too much as opposed to she plays too much. It don't look funny to you as opposed to it doesn't look funny to you. Next. And here's another prominent feature called habitual P. Habitual P here is basically B is used to indicate a habitual occurrence or state. So an example here is because it's in always the paper, always be in the paper. Stefan, if you will.
I didn't know a person by the name of Black. I was saying always be in the paper.
Thank you. And other examples like I be chilled till my boss shows up. You do be acting up sometimes. Next. And there's another feature called the remote past been. So here, been is often orthographically being used to transcribe this word, and it really means that the period being referred to is longer than normal, or is being used to affirm a state that is indeed being held for a long time. So the user might say, he been asked about me, or I been cleaned up the kitchen, we been left her little baby shower. If you would play the sound file, please.
He been asked about me, but I was in Cleveland, Mississippi to a women's convention.
Right, as you heard, he been asked about me. Next. And here, perhaps the most famous example of all is the so-called multiple negators. So here, basically in AAL, double or even triple negators can be used within a phrase, within phrases to emphasize negation. So an example here is, I ain't never had nobody do me like that. And also, they don't want to pay the employee nothing. If you would play the two files, please.
And I didn't like it because I never had nobody do me like that.
You know, record profit time and time again, and then they don't want to pay the employee nothing.
Thank you. Next. So what we decided to do is that we wanted to focus on the 7 features of African American English extracted from existing literature. And we annotated the presence of these features in the oral history transcriptions. And we basically have our annotators simultaneously listen to the audio to determine A, whether whether the features are transcribed or not, and also to tally up the presence of these features and how often they are transcribed faithfully, because transcribers, as I'll show you in a second, do not necessarily transcribe things faithfully. And this would help us to really estimate the true prevalence of these AAU features, so that teachers and educators can use them to demonstrate the existence of this feature in a very localized and realistic context. And in total, what we have done so far is we annotated 25 minutes from each oral histories, and we have so far completed 67 oral histories. Next. And now I'm going to play you a sound file, and I will then show you also the transcribed, what is actually transcribed by the original transcribers, and then how our student annotators would annotate the existence of that feature and whether the feature was transcribed faithfully. Could you play the file, please?
It seems I'm not allowed to play this file.
Okay,
so.
no worries. If you can just click next for me. So unfortunately, there's some technical issues, but the transcription here is they don't want to pay the employee nothing. Next. So here is an example of multiple negators, and it was transcribed correctly and faithfully. So we simply say, yeah, this is a case of multiple negator. Good. Next. And next again. And here we have the transcription saying that I asked the question because there were 4 of us there. Next. But the actual audio file would have said because I believe this is existential it and they, so it would be they were 4 of us there. I believe it would be the audio. So here is a case of linguistic features that is being unfaithfully transcribed. So we have 1 and we put asterisks to indicate that it was not actually transcribed. Next. Next. And here we have another example where the transcription would say a person do something, they are almost able to catch them. Next. And here basically we have a feature that involves the persons and number agreement. So do here does not agree with person, right? Otherwise it will be a person does something. So that's a linguistic features that we're interested in. Next. And in reality, here, the audio file wouldn't say they are almost able to catch them. It would have said they almost be able to catch them. So here, the user, here we have a feature called a null copula, and the transcriber failed to transcribe it faithfully. The transcriber fixed the audio, fixed the language by adding they are. And so here we have a case of incomplete or unfaithful transcription. Next. So I'm now going to switch back over to my slides, and thank you, Stefan. Okay. Okay. So it seems that there are some issues, potential issues with human transcribers. So we basically thought, okay, what would be the ultimate gold standard? Well, perhaps the gold standard should be certified transcribers, right? So we can look no further than court transcribers. So court transcribers are tasked to produce a verbatim transcript of court proceedings. So it has to be really, really accurate. And they're certified, supposedly, at 95% to 98% accuracy. However, research have shown that when it comes to transcribing audios of African American language, they're really only 60% of the time correct. And in many cases, if they do accidentally paraphrase the meaning of the speaker, they only correctly paraphrase things 33% of the time. So not only they're unfaithful, but when they do paraphrase things, they get it wrong. They get it wrong majority of the time. And so what that means is that these supposed perfect and very well-trained transcribers are unable to transcribe AAL language correctly, or they are also unable to understand the actual meaning behind the language. And there are other kind of issues as well with the court transcribers. They can recognize immediately the voices being black, and they associate the black voices with criminality, defiance, and untrustworthiness. So that brings us to think, okay, well, if the professionals have these problems, what about our oral history transcribers that are trained to transcribe oral histories, but not necessarily trained to transcribe African American language? Next. Oh, I'm doing it. So that brings us to an analysis that one of our student trainees conducted. So our student trainee, Michael, here conducted a research on looking at 14 oral history interviews by looking at a pool of 200 odd files. And in total, basically, he examined only the interviews that have transcribers that are transcribe multiple other interviews, and we focus on, let's say, the first 11 pages. And the overall finding is that there are a large amount of discrepancies of different types. So different type of discrepancies such as omission, insertion, substitution. And so, for example, the audio might have said a lot of my friend had got drafted and had already got killed, but the transcription actually have corrected things as a lot of my friend got drafted. So here we have an example of an omission error, omitting the had. And there's also insertion errors. Here I went to a lady who was teaching school in a wooden building. They inserted the word who. I went to a lady who was teaching school, blah, blah. And there are also some unaudible instances. And also substitution examples. So the speaker said the sentence, they start off with just 2 12th grade classes, but it was so many of us today that they had 3. The transcriber substitute, it was to they were, again, fixing the language of these AL speakers. So here we have some distribution of the errors. Essentially, that there are quite a lot of mistranscribed cases, and certain features are more prone to errors. For example, the existential it or they are particularly prone to errors, and also when it comes to the different types of errors, substitution error is the most dominant type of errors. They basically replace what they heard with something they thought is the correct transcription. So we also wanted to ask, okay, why don't we just use machines to help us, right? Why don't I just use Google cloud services and many of the existing commercial softwares that can automatically transcribe what people say? Well, because they do claim they have very good accuracy, right? These automatic speech recognition tools. So they have accuracy of, like, let's say, over 90%, 95% accuracy, and they're widely being used by many, many industries. But it turns out that there are fundamental problems with using existing tools like automatic speech recognitions that are trained not on African American English. So here's a study that clearly demonstrates that across multiple systems, Apple, IBM, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, when it comes to transcribing black speakers versus white speakers, they always perform worse for black speakers across all models. And they attributed this to be how they don't really understand, they have not been trained on the acoustics of African American speakers. And there are numerous other papers that have shown similar kind of biases with automatic speech recognitions. And our team conducted a research that looked at whether these existing automatic speech recognition models that are trained on standard American English, how they would deal with a specific and a very prominent feature, the habitual B feature that we mentioned. And in this work, what we found is that the ASR models by Google, and also there's another model called Deep Speech, are on average 5 to 2 times worse at recognizing this habitual B compared to other cases of B. And not only they're worse at capturing this specific feature, but the other words that are surrounding this linguistic feature, B, also get more erroneously transcribed by the system. So actually increases the errors of the surrounding words as well. And so that prompted us to think, okay, maybe we need an automatic way of dealing with this. We need to be able to annotate these linguistic features, and not necessarily just by hand, right? Because you can do things by hand, but we have 700 files, thousands and thousands, millions of words. We don't have the human resources to do that. So to that end, our team also developed a computational model that can automatically annotate African American linguistic features. And we have currently started doing this for the habitual B feature. And I won't bore you too much with the computational architecture, but essentially, in this specific case, we have a mixture of models using a rule-based system, as well as using a machine learning system. And because these African American English features can sometimes be quite rare, we also employ the technique called data augmentation to artificially increase the size of our data in order to increase the performance of our model that can classify whether the B is a habitual B or another instance of B. And we found that by adding this artificial data to our model, we had an improvement of 0.2 F-scores. And overall, we see this as a very good first step towards an automatic annotation for African American features. And our team right now is expanding this to other features that we are currently working on. And I also want to talk about another aspect of our annotation, namely parts of speech and name entity recognition. So these are basically natural language processing problems that people have been tackling over many, many years now. They are not new problems. Essentially, these problems is to frame the task as trying to annotate automatically the parts of speeches of the words in the transcription. So for example, here we have the sentence, Jim was born in the United States. We want to be able to automatically annotate Jim being a noun, was being the verb, born being the verb, in being a preposition, and so on. And with name entity recognition, we want to be able to automatically understand which set of words correspond to what kind of entity. So we want to automatically know that Jim is a person, 1952 is time, United States of America is a country. And this would be very, very useful if we wanted to extract themes and meanings from our transcription, allowing users to search by higher level linguistic annotations beyond just words. They can search, I want to get oral history interviews containing only countries, but only about this country, but not this country. I want to talk and look at oral history that is describing this time period between 1940 and 1960, right? By having these annotations, we'll be able to do this more effectively. And it turns out that using off-the-shelf tools that can do parsing and tagging, there are actually some issues that we've currently identified. And here we have an example on the left with the sentence, but all that done, gone, and past. And the existing off-the-shelf tool actually erroneously understands that this sentence being, but all that done, gone, and past. And the problem here is that the AAE has a perfective done here being tagged as a verb instead of as an auxiliary. So the speaker actually means that that has already gone and passed, as opposed to all that done being a single phrase. And in terms of name entity recognition, we also realized that this is very important because it will allow us to be able to search the oral histories for specific people, places, and time, and allow teachers to specifically use this to identify certain individuals and locations that are related to their curriculum that they want to design. And we have already tried a number of pre-trained name entity recognition models on the abstracts and also concrete entities. And we are currently hand annotating some of the name entities in 22 oral history to see whether the existing models work well, and if not, how we can enrich the existing models to be able to capture local people, places, and specific terminologies. And here's an example of a name entity recognition, input and output. So we have the utterance, when did you start working at W.T. Edwards, Miss Dixie? And the name entity recognition recognizes that W.T. Edwards here is a company, agency, or institute. It recognizes that Dixie is a person, and it recognizes that in a different sentence, Florida is also a company, agency, institute, and so on. And here we have more examples. For example, but you are the vice presidents of the NAACP, and here the model was successfully able to recognize NAACP being a company organization again. It also recognized that one day and being a specific or absolute relative date or periods. And another kind of annotation that we worked with concerns the topic that we want to be able to automatically extract. So what we did was that we used some off-the-shelf tools, again, to see how well they would work. And specifically, we used a model architecture called Top2Vec, which was trained on our oral history data. And then we collapsed the number of topics that is automatically derived from this model into, let's say, 15 more specialized topics. And we found that within each of these data-driven topics, we were able to identify the most salient subtopics and the most representative texts that correspond to those topics. And then what we could do with this is that we can divide up our text into the speaker turns in the oral history. So we can not just say whether this oral history contains these topics, these sets of topics, but we can say exactly which line, which utterance contribute to which topic. And so here are some examples of the most salient themes that we extracted from our archive. For example, there's a theme here about education, about elementary schools, about kindergarten. We have a theme here that talks about a specific local history, desegregations, and civic problems. And here we have a theme that talks about farming, agriculture, plantation, and not surprisingly also related to slavery. And here we have an example of topics that are mostly related to the key term church. So for example, we see there's some topics that concerns about pastor, Baptist church, preachers, Catholic church, chapel. And we also see some topics that relate to perhaps the regions where church is most relevant to. So downtown, city, central city, village, courthouse, Chicago, neighborhood, and certain districts. And also we have a theme that talks about that seems to indicate very specific location or home, offices, buildings, household. And here we have some passages that we extracted from our transcripts that are most representative of the topic church. For example, we have a specific oral history that has 75% relevance for the church topic, and here's a specific excerpt. We were religious because we had to use the churches. That's the only place we could have our mass meetings, etc. And here's another sentence. I've just mentioned that I guess you asked about the church. The first reason why I was ever part of the church was because my mother was, etc., etc. And we were also interested in the emotional dimension of the transcript of the interviews. So not only about what they are talking about, but whether they're talking about positive, negative topics. So to that end, we are experimenting with some pre-trained BERT models which we extracted from the Hugging Face library. And these models are again trained on standard American English. And we're focusing on very broad categories, like whether the sentiment, the emotion is positive versus negative, or is it mixed or unknown? And we have human annotators to correct these predicted sentiment classes. And we are basically doing this by combining it with some of our teaching here at HHU by my PhD student Akhilesh. He's currently running a course on Towards a Career in Language Technology, Linguistic Annotation, and in his class, he's training students to be able to annotate and correct different linguistic annotation, including the sentiment analysis title annotation. And there are some known challenges here that, for example, standard American English models of sentiment analyses tends to overly predict negative sentiments that are associated with African American English lexical items, because there are specific lexical items of AAE that have different meanings in AAE than in standard American English. And also, these models tend to fail to capture conversational context. They tend to evaluate each sentence one by one, as opposed to understanding the entire passage, entire flow of the dialogue. And again, they don't know any local history, they don't know any local content, they don't really know what is positive or negative, historically speaking. They can only analyze a sentence and the words the sentence contains. So here's an example of the interface that we're using to correct our annotation. So we have the conversational tone one by one being displayed on the screen, and we have different classes that are shown, and we'll show the one that the model predicted. So here's a conversational tone by an interviewee. Basically says something about, my father was killed when I was very, very young by a white male, and my mother got remarried, and my brother recently passed away. So all these are very negative events. So the model successfully predicted that this is negative. But let's say the model failed to predict this to be negative, and a human annotator could go into this system to be able to look at the context and correct the annotation. And I would like to say special thanks to Akhilesh and also to his many students in this course here at HHU. And finally, having annotated the African American features, thematic and sentiment annotations, and also part of speech and name entity annotations, we're also very much interested in aligning the correct transcriptions with the speech. So now the text is very faithful to the audio. Now we can align them temporally. So here's an example, an illustration of what that means. So basically we want a specific utterance, a specific word, a specific sound being aligned with the audio, so that users will be able to search to play a specific utterance, a specific word out of the 500 oral histories that we have. And this is very useful for the teachers, because teachers then be able to extract out, export clips that they can use in their classes. And they'll be able to use this to determine which African American English features are also present in our histories. And for the linguists, we can also use this to examine whether existing speech recognition systems can actually even recognize these features. If not, how can we improve them? And to that end, we have applied some models that can do this job for us. And right now, we find that shorter utterances are prone to greater displacement with the target timestamps. And we're working very closely now with our computational team to improve the force alignment quality. So just to wrap up here, we have a lot of future directions to explore. Specifically, we are currently working on improving our automatic African American English annotation, and also on how to automatically derive sociolinguistically important metadata. And we're doing this by combining a mixture of human-in-the-loop design. So we will have annotators working with existing machineries, and we also will be using off-the-shelf tools that are not necessarily trained on African-American language, but we'll use them to bootstrap the process, to kickstart the process. And having annotated a number of dimensions, we will also be working with usability experts to design our interface that are ultimately going to be used by our different user groups. And we'll be working closely with our user groups to get a feedback on the design of our interface and the feature accuracy. And overall, and finally, we'll hope to be able to use this resource that we developed to contribute to the development of more equitable language technologies, such as automatic speech recognition. And I'll encourage you guys, if you're interested in this project, to stay tuned for more. Here are some of our Twitter handles and also our project page URL again. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for this really, really interesting, awesome talk and this presenting this really awesome project. And now we invite our audience at YouTube to post your questions in the chat and to give you some time for asking your questions. The three of us will probably start with our questions because we're really looking forward to asking you stuff. And if I might just start, because you said with the text to speech alignment, you're also doing some well, you're also working with the audio files computationally. Could that be done for sentiment analysis, as in taking the audio files into account for computational sentiment analysis, as in loudness or emphasis or something like that?
Absolutely, and this is actually also in our project proposal. We wanted to look at sentiment not just from text, but also from audio. So from text is actually most of the sentiment analysis architectures and models out there focus mostly on text because that's what people have been developing. Audio is actually a lot more challenging, and it turns out that we're using existing models that can detect the sentiment from audio, trained on trained on standard American English, is going to again have a problem in our case because the intonations of the African American English speakers are different. So I believe that in terms of human listeners, they actually would have a perception bias in hearing African American English speakers being more angry and rude, but actually that just entirely how the specific language conveys their emotion and grammar. So we're also looking into this, but it's going to be a lot more challenging than text-based sentiment analyses.
Does one of you, Eileen or Isabel, want to chime in?
Yes, of course. Also, thank you from my side. It was really interesting, and I might follow the discussion round with a kind of more broader question, I would say. You also said that one of your next steps would be also the evaluation with user groups. And would you also, or can you already explain a little bit how this could be looked for the specific case for your study? Because I would assume it's not so easy maybe also to get the user group, but I'm not sure. So this is the reason why I'm asking.
Thank you. So we have different user groups, so let me start with, for example, the educators. So we are one of our collaborative group is the Y'all Social Justice Collective. And this collective consists basically of educators in the state of Florida. And they are basically a lot of them are the end users. And so working directly with the collectives, we'll be able to have them give us feedback on our interface. And so to begin with, I think we want to make the interface user-friendly enough for the teachers. Extending that to the students will perhaps take more time. And the second kind of users are going to be the linguists. And we can get these users mostly first internally within our linguistic community. And also another third set of users are the oral historians. They're those who are actually interested in searching the historical content. And we have one of our collaborators is the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, and they have a wealth of network with the Oral History Association in the US. This work has already been presented to the larger association, and we're getting very positive support from that very community. So we have also budgeted some money as part of our studies to do more careful rounds of usability studies supported by our university librarians who are experts in that area. And I believe we are we said we'll do basically 2 or 3 rounds of usability studies as part of this project. So in our first year, we're going to focus on, let's say, 50 to 100 oral histories to begin with, and we wanted to already have a pilot interface that we can start to get some feedback on. And we have a community, we have an advisory group consists of community members, for example, local pastors, also professors in nursing, and also various African-American community or societies in the state of Florida. So our panel consists of multiple community leaders in these respective areas, and they we meet up with them once or twice a year, and we showcase our progress and the kind of objectives that we have and what we have done. And we had one meeting already with them to begin to kickstart the project, and we look forward to the next meeting where we're going to propose some of these interface and design that we have come up with, and we look forward to hearing what they have to share with us.
Okay, thank you. So this also, I would say, shows that it's also a really diverse group, and that there are really different kinds of people also involved.
Exactly. That's what makes this project so interesting, because we were able to basically be able to satisfy the needs of multiple communities. So often with academic research, we often are so focused on one specific dimensions that are very important for our discipline, and we often neglect the actual people who are actually going to actually benefit from the work. And in this case, we're really trying to put the users first, because ultimately they are the societies who we are serving. And so we make that a very important component in this proposal, and we explicitly design in advisory group and different community that we can get feedback from. And I really tried, and I learned a lot from this project by, for the first time, really put the users first, as opposed to overtly focus on the research outcome. And I would love to see more projects that have this kind of perspective as well. And yeah.
Yes, so I guess it's now my turn, and you somehow started my question with answering saying you learned a lot, because I wanted to ask something personal. So, I mean, language is something that is not static. It is diverse, and it is changing, and it is growing. And as a researcher, sometimes we have assumptions, so things we are expecting when we would like to do research, because we, for example, are familiar with the background or with previous research. And what I wanted to ask you, and that's why it's something personal, did the research you conducted with your team also and with all the collaborators met your expectation? Or was there also something where you would say right now, wow, that was something I didn't expect, or that was something I never thought about it? I mean, as I said, it's very personal, but I guess it's also somehow interesting, because that's a process of research, right? Yeah, that's my question to you. Thank you.
Yeah, so what I didn't expect, I guess one of the most unexpected, I guess a few things. First of all, is because of during the development of this proposal, I get to learn a lot more about information science, and from the University of Florida library set of researchers, and they actively conduct research in information science, and also they have expert knowledge, as I said, in usability studies, in metadata. So there's a metadata librarian, the usability experts, there are people who knows so many different, and we have subject librarians in African American studies, and so on. So I was so surprised to know that there are so many different specialists within that discipline, and because I wasn't in that discipline, so it's all very new to me. And second of all, I get to learn more about how oral historian works with the data and what they perceive as what are the most useful kind of annotation for them, and what is the kind of end goal. And the reason I learned a lot about it's because when we take a look at the kind of data and how they archive their resources and the kind of annotation that they created, they're very, very different from how fieldwork linguists would conduct their interviews. And then we suddenly realize that the actual data itself is basically the same. They go out and talk to individuals and speak with them in order to record not just history but also language. And I guess because the objective is different and the kind of annotation is also very different. So for linguistic research, we're interested in things like how old a person is, what languages did their parents speak, and where have they lived, where have they moved to, how many years they spoke this language and spoke that language, and what community do they interact with, what's your socioeconomical status. And none of these seems to be of particular interest to a typical oral history interview, a part of the data collection. That's not very important, at least not the key. And so we were very surprised that none of these data exist in the first place. So, so as we kind of discussed with the team, we also realized that to be able to convey the importance of the linguistic work, namely why it is interesting to talk about African American language, realize that that is something that is often under-discussed. They know that they speak differently, but no one really knows how they speak differently. So we're working very closely with our oral history team, for example, to conduct workshops and internal trainings about what are these different linguistic features in order to enable our oral history transcribers to be able to faithfully transcribe the future oral history and be not just faithful to the audio, but faithful to the language itself. So I think often the focus in that line of research is faithful to the history, but I think for linguistic research, we also want to be faithful to the language, and having that, having both of them at once is most ideal, but it seems that different disciplines have different foci.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
And let me just really quickly pass on something from Tanya Kuteva from the chat. She said, "Great talk, thank you, Kevin." And I can just only emphasize that as well. Then let me maybe ask you another question. I don't know. I have so many questions. Maybe where to start, because it fits with the questions already asked. Thank you for shedding a light on this research library structure, because this is something that we kind of take for often in our research take for granted, and you shedding a light on that is really interesting and really important. And so what I was thinking about, the computational aspects, the really technical aspects you also explained are quite technical, to put it in a word. How do you communicate those aspects, like and their merits to the stakeholders and to those people involved? I think the research librarians, they do know these techniques, but I think it might, well, how would you communicate that?
That's an excellent question, and I would say that yeah, we actually have been doing this because we have basically three separate teams in this project. We have the library team, we have the oral history / education team, we have the linguistic team, and these teams need to work with each other. And we realize that often we need to illustrate things not just with example, but also perhaps with with some kind of interactive platform So currently we are basically designing a few kind of internal platforms so that our different research subgroups can interact with these different tools to give them a sense of what these tools can buy us. And because without understanding them, it's kind of difficult for them to give us feedback. For example, with the education team, what they have been already doing, and I have not reported this finding, this work by them, they have already been designing curriculum using the oral histories that we want to focus on. And they've been designing this curriculum by looking at the most important topics that the teachers want, right? So they discuss with their set of end users, and they've started to do this. But as a linguistics team here, say, oh, we can actually help you with generating this curriculum more quickly. For example, if you wanted to look at all the interviews that contain certain themes or topics, we can already do that. And we find that in this process of communicating between the teams, we actually went back and forth quite a few times to try to find it. We find it by just showing them the findings, like the one I just showed you today with these different clouds. That didn't really work that well. And we really had to have something that is a lot more interactive and really make it a hands-on experience. And so our team is actively trying to improve the communication between the education team in order for them to, and also with the library team, to really basically communicate what we're trying to do, and hopefully we can help each other out, right? So they don't have to look at things manually because we have the tools to do that already. And similarly, we're right now working with the metadata librarian, and when we first described to the librarian, we're interested in metadata, enriching our metadata, and our librarian, of course, said, well, we have metadata already. Here's the metadata that we have. But then, of course, because of coming from a different discipline, what the librarian thinks the metadata is not what we need for sociolinguistic research. Right, so having that discussion was very fruitful because now we know what kind of metadata is absent and what we need to try to annotate and perhaps automatically. So how can we, for example, automatically extract the profession or the place of birth of our interviewee from the transcripts without having to manually skim through 15 or 30 pages of the discussions. And yeah, I think it's a struggle that we're trying to tackling, and it's surprisingly difficult, but I think we are there to meet the challenge.
Thank you for this real-world feedback as well, because as you mentioned, communicating something with word clouds, that's always something that is kind of presented to be an easy way or an intuitive way of understanding things. And it's really interesting that you found that difficult communicating with that.
Yeah, and often because these like basic word cloud kind of visualization, they require lots of interpretation. You still need someone to interpret what these visual means. And so yeah, a picture does really speak 1,000 words, but you need someone to translate 1,000 words often. And there's also a technological barrier as well. Some people are more accustomed to, for example, a lot of the oral historians would be very interested in looking at the transcription and doing very close reading of the transcript and listening closely to the audio. And that is very different from the kind of uses we would have in the linguistic research space. We don't listen to the same sentence 500 times. We're interested in looking at the broader picture of linguistic features that are being present and absent. So often we find that when we do develop, a new technology, to the other teams, they don't really quite necessarily immediately understand what is the merit of that, and we really have to provide a demonstration, which we're currently designing. We have a demonstration for oral history, for African American features. We have a demonstration for what topic modeling can buy us. We have a demonstration already designed, but we haven't delivered that yet, on what sentiment analysis means. So right now, my PhD student here at HHU has been helping me, for example, with the setting up an annotation platform using an open source tool that can it's very interactive. So the screen you saw earlier on with the sentiment analysis interface is basically click and button clicking. It's very, very intuitive, very, very dynamic. And we're hoping that that can also be used to train our, not just our annotators, but also other members of the research group to showcase what kind of work we're doing.
So would one of you like to ask a question, or I'd already have a follow-up, so.
So I would say you could also go with the follow-up, Stefan. The only thing that I have to say from the chat right now is also that there is more positive feedback about your presentation. So thank you, very interesting research. I have no question, but I enjoyed your talk. And also another person also communicated that the talk was really interesting.
Oh, thank you for the audience.
Thank you so much. So then I'll have a quick follow-up, because this is something you kind of touched on right now, because what you talked about also really touches on the aspect of well, literacies, and in this case of a digital literacy, which is also kind of this field we're all really getting to know, that this is a topic that we'll have to teach the future generations of students, of researchers, and maybe combining your thoughts on just how that impacts the research, and especially student research. At the beginning, you talked about the need for a more equitable language technology. What consequences does that have for the education of language technologists, as in linguists? And how far does the need for that also leads to maybe different needs in education?
Yeah, let me break that down in a few sub-questions, perhaps. So the first one being digital literacy, and to that end, I believe that it's a particularly challenging thing to meet, especially in the Faculty of Philosophy. And here, a lot of our students are not accustomed to any kind of computational numbers stuff, right? And after all, that's kind of why they choose this core discipline, not in mathematics, right? Not in computer science. But that is not to say that digital literacy and numeracy are not important. And I still very much believe that it is possible to enhance the digital literacy and numeracy for kind of traditional humanities domain. And to that end, my research group here are doing quite a few things to try to tackle that. For example, the number of courses that we're designing right now are basically trying to meet that demand. So, for example, the course run by my PhD student, the one's called Towards a Career in Language Technology, Linguistic Annotation. That course does not require programming skills, but that course does require linguistic knowledge, or specifically, how can you apply linguistic knowledge how they apply and utilize linguistic knowledge as part of, to contribute to the design of a language technological database, for example. So students get to work with correcting and understanding existing output and predicted outputs from the different language technological models like sentiment analysis, topic modeling, or part-of-speech tagging. So students would get to they get to learn more about what these tools can do, but also they get to do hands-on corrections and evaluation. And that is very much something that anyone can do as long as they have linguistic training and also some training with these annotation interfaces. And so what we want to do is we want to make it very hands-on. We want to make it very easy to assess. You don't need to know how to program to take the course, and really give students the skills that they would need when they do get their first job, for example, as an entry-level data engineer, as they call it sometimes. And so the entry level basically means correcting annotations, transcriptions, and they don't need to be able to code. And that would be kind of one step into language technology, should the students are interested in that area. And another thing that I'm also actively doing is to design courses in statistics and specifically with a focus on improving numeracy. So how can we better understand numbers and figures that we get from different voting campaigns or election campaigns, or from like the efficacy of vaccines, right? So people became more and more sensitive into aware of that. A percentage doesn't mean much sometimes. You need to really understand how to interpret the data. When you conduct a survey with 100 people, what does that mean? Is that really representative? So I teach courses to that end to try to improve the numeracy of the students. Again, with a very, very low entry no entry requirement, starting from scratch. And I'm hoping the student can apply their knowledge in the future, not necessarily in programming, but actually be able to better interpret numbers, and which is very much everywhere these days. And next semester, my student Akhilesh and myself, we are going to design new courses that are going to involve hands-on, involve language technology tools, again, like speech recognition or text-to-speech syntheses kind of tools, but not just using a basic computer, because I thought to make it even more interesting, accessible, we wanted to show students what a computer is, what is the fundamental element of a computer. So we actually got awarded an NVIDIA hardware award to get 20-odd Jetson development toolkits. So these are basically like small computers that are portable, like Raspberry Pis, kind of computers, and we got these hardwares to use for teaching. So as part of that educational project funded by NVIDIA, we are hoping to design courses that can get students hands-on to interact with these hardware, at the same time try to use this to improve their digital literacies and as well as awareness of language technology. So we're actively doing things in this area, and overall I'm hoping to constantly involve my students and their education in terms of folding them into the different research projects that I have ongoing, to make it very much research-based and as well as research-led, to make it more relevant. So students know I'm not just taking this because the textbook said so, but I'm doing this because real people are actually working on this problem right now. And so the computational linguistic team here by myself and also by Dr. Müller at the University of Florida, she's also doing something similar in her courses. She's making sure that her students' hands-on project experiences and term papers, all these are relevant to our NEH project.
Thank you so much for that. I'm sorry that I posed 3 questions in one, but you really answered them absolutely and very interestingly. Having a look at the clock and only 5 minutes to go, I might just ask a rather maybe quick technical question. do you also use those top-to-vec topics for the search engine you showed to us? So are those top-to-vec topics treated as metadata, and are they searchable?
Yeah, right now we have not connected the top-to-vec output to the search engine, but that is the aim. So we want the search engine, the prototype interface, so such that people can search for different topics and also by different sentiment. So for example, someone might be interested in looking up our histories that are related to church or church religious related topics, but they want to look at ones that are particularly negative. And so they can search by topic and by sentiment. And let's say furthermore, they want to look at, I don't know, also the linguistic features that are particularly being used by African American. Only in this data, they can kind of further refine the search criteria to be able to search by topic, by sentiment, but also by linguistic features. And that was basically our proposed design in the NUH proposal. Yeah, that part cannot be implemented yet because we have we are basically now doing the back end work, developing the back end technologies. The front end has yet to be designed.
Yes, but I think it sounds really interesting because it's so rich then, and also powerful because it combines these three aspects. And yeah, I just wanted to slide in with this comment, so I hope I don't interrupted you, Stefan.
Then I would also follow up with, I guess, more comment than a question, but also regarding the frame of this event. So I also today heard often, and I guess, or I would say this is important, that, for example, what you presented today is not a one-man show, if one would like to say. And you also said that, Professor Teng, it needs much more diverse disciplines, and only because it's history or language that this doesn't mean only people who are doing research about history are eligible, for example, to do this research. Much more needed are, again, diverse disciplines to combine the knowledge, the techniques, the experience, and then to work as a team. And that was something today that I really enjoyed because that was really visible during your presentation. And I think that's something also, if we are looking to disciplines like digital humanities and history including, and language, but then, as you said, also libraries, information science, that this is something that is already working together and where methods and topics are also already interconnected with each other. And that was, for me, as I said, really interesting today because, yeah, I think that's important also for the future to shed light on those needed, I would say, circumstances.
Thank you for that comment, and I completely wholeheartedly agree. And I am all for interdisciplinary research, and in many cases, that's the only way forward for certain problems that we're trying to solve. And to that, I'm very grateful that I have met collaborators who are interested enough to entertain me and be able to try and be patient enough to communicate with each other and understand each other's point of view. And that's not often easy. Because when you're in a different discipline, you're speaking a different language, and that is one of the challenges that any interdisciplinary projects would have. And I think there's also a separate challenge here in Germany, where when it comes to finding third-party funding. And as far as I know, if you were to apply to the DFG, you very much have to select a specific discipline, a specific subcategory. So that inherently, in my opinion, make getting funding for the interdisciplinary project more challenging. So let's say I wanted to collaborate with library studies, also with histories, the history department, but also with linguistics. Then now we have this thing, okay, which category do we put our project under? And there's something to be said about improving the existing third-party funding kind of reviewing system. And I look forward to seeing how this will develop in the future in Germany. And that is not to say this is impossible, but it's certainly a lot more challenging from the Germany perspective.
Yeah, thank you so much again. Having a look at the clock, we're at 4 o'clock, but let me just really briefly point out that the topics you just spoke about, this is kind of the stuff we'll deal with in the last section of this lecture series when we'll meet up in person. The challenges and opportunities of doing research interdisciplinarily, and yeah, as you said, we really can't do it without interdisciplinary research, but it's not always easy in communicating and as well as in funding. It's just yeah, the way it currently is and the things we have to deal with. But not to end on a rather sad note, but thank you very, very much, Kevin. It was an awesome talk, and I enjoyed it very much, and it really touched on so many aspects we could talk on for hours, because it's somewhere between, like you talked about historians and oral historians, and I think future historians will also be interested in this stuff and in this corpora you're building, and it's just a really interesting project, and it was a pleasure to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you again, Eileen, Isabel, and Stefan for inviting me, and I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to share what I'm doing with everyone.
Thank you so much. So then one last point is me pointing out the next session, which kind of fits thematically, because our university library will be represented by Dr. Ute Olligis-Wieczorek and Dirk Fleischer, who are both working in the digitization department and the research data management department of our library, under the heading Libraries as Providers of Data, Bibliotheken als Datengeber, digital collections as the basis for research and citizen science projects, so digitale Sammlungen als Basis für Forschungs- und citizen science Projekte, and it will take place on the 24th of June, der 24. Juni, and the same time, the same place, also via YouTube. So thanks again very much, and we'll hope to see you again soon, Kevin, and maybe also at our closing event, and also the viewers on YouTube. Thank you, and till the next time.